The sun had just begun to rise over the serene town of Maple Hills when a phone call disrupted the peaceful atmosphere of the Dawson household, located on a tree-lined street. A mother answered the phone, unaware that this moment would irrevocably alter the trajectory of their lives. The monotonous voice on the other end delivered the shocking news of a horrific series of murders. Neither Karen nor David Dawson could comprehend the gravity of what they were hearing. The unimaginable had occurred. Their daughter, Amy Dawson, was at the center of a violent spree that had left the community in a state of shock and disbelief. However, this is not where our narrative commences. It begins many years prior in that same tranquil home, showcasing the seemingly perfect life of a normal girl growing up in an idyllic suburban town. As the Dawson family confronts the grim reality that their child has transformed into a cold-blooded killer, the investigation reveals chilling details, gradually assembling the life and psyche of Amy Dawson. This documentary seeks to delve into the haunting question: how does an innocent child evolve into a mass murderer, and how could her parents have overlooked the warning signs? Amy Dawson was born on a warm summer evening in June 1994, the first and only child of Karen and David. Maple Hills was a town where everyone was familiar with one another, a close-knit community characterized by minimal crime and a strong sense of belonging. David, a high school science teacher, and Karen, a nurse at the local hospital, were overjoyed when they welcomed their baby girl into their home for the first time. Amy's childhood appeared to be idyllic. Amy's story initially appeared to be that of an ordinary girl raised in a nurturing and stable household. She was reserved yet engaged, consistently achieving high grades and actively participating in the local youth group. As time went on, Karen and David were impressed by Amy's exemplary behavior, noting her obedience and good manners in comparison to her peers. She never exhibited tantrums, engaged in arguments, or deviated from established rules. Karen reflects, her voice slightly trembling, that they believed Amy's demeanor was simply a reflection of her naturally good nature. While they considered themselves fortunate to have such a well-behaved child, beneath Amy's calm surface, a more troubling reality was developing, one that neither her parents nor the community of Maple Hills could foresee. As Amy transitioned into her teenage years, subtle changes in her behavior began to emerge. Although Karen and David continued to view her as the ideal child, there were indications that something was amiss. Teachers at her high school started to report concerning behaviors, including disruptions in class, disturbing and violent artwork, and a growing tendency to withdraw from social interactions. Initially, Miss Thornton, Amy's art teacher, dismissed these changes as typical adolescent mood swings. However, she soon recognized that Amy's artwork conveyed a disquieting sense of detachment. It was not merely a manifestation of teenage angst but rather a clinical portrayal of violence. Furthermore, Amy's friendships began to wane, with former classmates expressing discomfort in her presence. One former friend noted that by junior year, Amy had undergone a significant transformation. Emma's behavior had changed significantly. It seemed as though she had ceased to care about anyone or anything. She developed a peculiar habit of staring intently, as if she were observing and anticipating an event. Despite the numerous warning signs, Amy's parents chose to overlook the issues. Karen, a nurse, attributed her daughter's unusual conduct to academic stress, while David, ever the optimist, believed Amy was merely experiencing a phase. They reassured themselves that their daughter's peculiar behavior was simply a part of the growing pains associated with adolescence. However, as investigators would later uncover, this was the initial sign of the darkness that had been brewing within Amy for years. The seemingly perfect and obedient child had been concealing something significant all along. The summer following Amy's high school graduation marked the onset of a series of murders. The body of a local drifter, Michael Grant, was discovered in the woods just outside the town, his throat brutally slashed in what appeared to be a random act of violence. Maple Hills, a community unaccustomed to such heinous crimes, was left in shock. The police had no leads, and the incident was dismissed as the work of an outsider. However, it was not long before additional bodies began to surface. The killings were irregular, and the victims appeared to be unrelated: an elderly woman found dead in her home, a teenage boy discovered strangled by the riverbank, and a young mother fatally stabbed in a grocery store parking lot. Each murder escalated in violence, instilling fear within the community. Locking doors at night, a practice previously unheard of, became a common ritual among the townspeople. At that time, no one suspected Amy. She had recently begun her college journey, residing at home with her parents while commuting to a nearby university. To those around her, she appeared to be an ordinary young woman, quiet, dedicated to her studies, and still the well-mannered girl they had always known. However, investigators later uncovered that Amy was leading a double life. The obedient daughter at home was, in reality, a cold and calculating murderer. With each crime, she became bolder and more confident in her ability to evade capture. The unsettling truth about Amy Dawson emerged on an otherwise typical day in November. Karen and David noticed a shift in their daughter's demeanor in the weeks leading up to that day. She had grown increasingly withdrawn, her eyes appearing hollow and distant. The revelation came when they stumbled upon her notebook, which shattered their perception of her. David discovered the small black leather journal hidden beneath her mattress while tidying her room. It was filled with detailed accounts of her murders, meticulously chronicling how she stalked her victims, executed the killings, and felt nothing but exhilaration in the aftermath. "At first, we thought it was a joke," David recounted, his voice thick with disbelief. "I didn't want to accept it, but the way she detailed everything, it was unmistakably our Amy." In the days that followed, Karen and David faced an agonizing decision: to report their daughter or to shield her from the consequences of her actions. It was a choice fraught with impossibility, but as more bodies were discovered and fear gripped the community, the Dawsons realized they could no longer remain in denial. The night they called the police marked the most challenging experience of their lives. Karen wept uncontrollably while David, his hands shaking, dialed for help and provided their address. Upon the police's arrival to apprehend Amy, she offered no resistance. She neither cried nor begged. Instead, she fixed her parents with a chilling gaze, her eyes devoid of warmth and innocence, which had once reflected love. During her interrogation, Amy exhibited an alarming absence of remorse for her actions, discussing the murders with a dispassionate demeanor, as if she were merely commenting on the weather rather than the lives she had extinguished. Investigators were taken aback by her utter lack of empathy. She felt no guilt or shame, only a detached curiosity regarding the extent of her own capabilities. Detective Harris, the lead investigator, remarked that Amy was unlike any individual he had ever interrogated. Most suspects display some form of emotion: fear, anger, or regret, but Amy was devoid of such feelings, which was profoundly unsettling. In her confession, she disclosed that her fantasies of killing had begun in her youth, describing the exhilarating sense of power she experienced when taking a life, which made her feel invincible. She claimed that the murders were a means of exerting control over a world from which she felt increasingly alienated. The evidence against her was overwhelming, including her journal, her confession, and forensic findings, all confirming her guilt. However, as the trial loomed, a haunting question lingered in the minds of her parents, the investigators, and the community: why had Amy, a girl raised in a nurturing environment, transformed into a monster? The trial of Amy Dawson became a focal point of public intrigue. In the most sensational case in the town's history, reporters from across the nation flocked to Maple Hills, eager to report on the story of a small-town girl who had become a mass murderer. The courtroom was filled daily with locals, journalists, and even visitors who had traveled to witness Amy's trial. In the front row sat Karen and David, their faces pale and drawn. Their attorney had advised them against speaking to the press, yet their silence only intensified media speculation. How could two loving parents raise a child who became a killer? What had gone awry? Amy's defense team contended that she had been afflicted by an undiagnosed mental illness, citing her violent fantasies and lack of empathy as indicators of a more profound psychological issue. They called upon expert witnesses to discuss the potential for antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. However, the prosecution, armed with Amy's own chilling confessions and journal entries, portrayed her as a cold, calculating individual who was fully aware of her actions. Ultimately, the jury took less than 2 hours to reach their verdict, guilty on all counts. Amy Dawson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Amy displayed no emotion, as if the outcome held no significance for her. While the trial concluded, for Karen and David Dawson, the nightmare was far from over. Their daughter, the child they had cherished and nurtured, was a mass murderer. The burden of this reality was unbearable, compelling them to leave Maple Hills, unable to confront the stares and whispers that followed them. Of their former friends and neighbors, they moved to a small town miles away where no one knew their story. In the years that followed, Karen and David struggled to come to terms with what had happened. They visited Amy in prison once, but the experience was too painful. Amy was cold, distant, as though she barely recognized them. "I don't know that girl," Karen says quietly. "The girl we raised is gone. I don't know who that woman is." The story of Amy Dawson is one that continues to haunt the town of Maple Hill. It's a story of deception, of a seemingly perfect child hiding a dark and violent secret, but it's also a story of the devastating consequences of denial. How Karen and David, in their desire to believe the best of their daughter, missed the signs that something was deeply wrong. As experts have since pointed out, Amy's behavior exhibited many of the hallmarks of a sociopath: a lack of empathy, a desire for control, and an ability to manipulate those around her. But what remains unclear is how much of this was nature and how much was new. Retour. Could anything have been done to prevent the tragedy, or was Amy always destined to follow this dark path? Amy Dawes' trial may have ended with a guilty verdict, but the ramifications of her actions continued to ripple throughout Maple Hills and beyond. The psychological impact of her crimes and the revelations that followed left a profound mark on everyone connected to the case. This chapter of Amy's life was more than a study in law enforcement. It became an unsettling dive into the darkest corners of human nature. Karen and David's. After relocating to a small town far from their previous home, where no one was aware of their past, Karen and David faced significant challenges in reconciling with the events that had transpired. They made a single visit to Amy in prison, but the encounter proved too painful. Amy appeared cold and distant, as if she hardly recognized them. "I don't know that girl," Karen remarked softly. "The child we raised is gone. I don't know who that woman is." The narrative of Amy Dawson remains a haunting tale for the community of Maple Hills, characterized by deception and the facade of a seemingly perfect child concealing a dark and violent truth. It also illustrates the tragic consequences of denial, as Karen and David, in their wish to see the best in their daughter, overlooked the warning signs indicating something was profoundly amiss. Experts have noted that Amy's behavior displayed numerous characteristics typical of a sociopath, including a lack of empathy, a need for control, and a talent for manipulation. However, the question persists: to what extent were these traits a result of nature versus nurture? Could the tragedy have been averted, or was Amy inevitably bound to tread this grim path? Although Amy Dawson's trial concluded with a guilty verdict, the repercussions of her actions continue to reverberate throughout Maple Hills and beyond. The psychological effects of her crimes and the subsequent revelations have left an indelible impact on all those associated with the case. This chapter of Amy's life transcended mere legal analysis; it became a disquieting exploration of the darkest aspects of human nature. The emotional disintegration of the parents paralleled the revelation of their daughter's true identity. In their quest for understanding, they turned to psychologists who scrutinized Amy's behavior from her early years into adulthood. Each session left the parents increasingly heartbroken as specialists analyzed what appeared to be Amy's idyllic childhood. One psychologist, Dr. Stanley Hearse, suggested that Amy's emotional detachment could indicate psychopathy, a condition that may have been developing for years. He noted that she likely processed emotions differently than most individuals, even in her youth. In an interview, he remarked that her extreme obedience and compliance as a child might not signify a healthy upbringing but rather emotional disconnection. The absence of rebellion suggested a lack of genuine engagement with her surroundings. Karen later reflected that these sessions, while illuminating, felt like relentless blows to her already shattered heart. How could the child she had lovingly nurtured and sung to sleep transform into someone capable of such heinous acts? The experts' assessments painted a picture not of a misled child but of one potentially predisposed to destruction from the outset. David, ever the realist, found some comfort in grasping the scientific explanations for Amy's behavior, yet this understanding did not alleviate the persistent guilt. Had they inadvertently contributed to her darkness? Was there something they could have altered in their approach? Each response from the experts seemed to generate countless additional questions, none of which provided the closure they desperately sought. Amy's life behind bars was profoundly unsettling, as she maintained a cold and composed demeanor that remained unchanged over the years. Both prison guards and inmates noted her unnerving calmness, displaying no signs of remorse or fear. Her complete indifference to her circumstances baffled the staff, some of whom had extensive experience with violent offenders yet had never encountered an individual so detached from their actions. "She doesn't seem to care that she's here," remarked one correctional officer who worked closely with Amy daily. "Most people get angry or at least upset when they realize they're stuck here for life, but for her, it's as if she has already accepted it or worse, that she never cared at all." Within the prison, Amy quickly earned a reputation for her intelligence and manipulative tendencies. While she seldom engaged in physical confrontations, she possessed a remarkable ability to psychologically dominate those around her. Although she was not overtly cruel, she skillfully sowed discord among the inmates, pitting them against one another with her carefully chosen words. It did not take long for Amy to become a shadowy figure within the prison, feared not for her physical strength but for her cunning. In interviews with prison psychologists, Amy continued to exhibit an unsettling detachment. When asked if she felt any regret for the murders, her response was chillingly straightforward: "No, they were necessary." Back in Maple Hills, the shock of Amy's crimes lingered long after the trial, transforming the once quiet town, known for its friendly neighbors and close-knit community, into a place of infamy. The residence of a mass murderer was steeped in a profound sense of betrayal. Many of Amy's former friends, teachers, and neighbors found it difficult to reconcile the gentle, reserved girl they once knew with the violent criminal she had become. "You think you know someone," remarked Miss Thornton, Amy's high school art instructor. "I examined her artwork for years, and while there were hints of darkness, I never imagined it was genuine. I never believed for a moment that she was capable of such actions." Local parents grew increasingly protective of their own children, with some even pursuing psychological evaluations, fearing that their offspring might also conceal hidden darkness. The unsettling notion that someone could coexist with them for years without revealing their true self haunted the community. Karen and David were compelled to sell their home and move away. The whispers circulating in town, the sidelong glances, and the burden of knowing their daughter was responsible for such immense suffering became unbearable. Although relocating did not erase the memories, it offered them a chance to begin anew, even if that meant carrying an invisible weight that no one else could fully comprehend. Perhaps the most tragic aspect was the death of John Dawson, Amy's cousin and one of her earliest victims. John had survived the initial assault but ultimately succumbed to his injuries in the hospital weeks later. His death, though not as brutal as some of Amy's other acts, left a lasting impact on the Dawson family. For David and Karen, John's passing was an irreparable loss that further fractured their already broken family. The brother and sister-in-law found it nearly impossible to meet the gaze of others following the trial, acutely aware that their niece had taken the life of their son. Family gatherings, once vibrant with joy and warmth, were now overshadowed by a profound sense of absence and silence. David later reflected on the situation, expressing that the loss of John was particularly devastating. While he acknowledged the tragedy of all the lives lost, he emphasized that John was family, their blood, and that Amy had taken him from them. The case of Amy Dawson sparked a national conversation, with many questioning whether true justice had been achieved. Her apparent lack of remorse and the calculated nature of her actions led some to argue that life imprisonment was insufficient. They contended that someone so cold and unrepentant should face the death penalty. Conversely, others believed that Amy's mental health should have played a more significant role in her sentencing. Was she genuinely in control of her actions, or was she a victim of a profoundly disturbed psyche? Legal scholars examined the case, highlighting Amy as a representation of the complexities within the criminal justice system. The dilemma of punishment versus rehabilitation was prominent. Could someone like Amy be rehabilitated, or was she beyond redemption? Could her emotional detachment be addressed, or was she inherently different? Ultimately, Amy remained incarcerated, her sentence unchanged, yet the discourse surrounding her fate persisted long after the trial. It evolved into a case study within legal and psychological discussions, leaving a lasting impact on both the local community and the nation as a whole. Karen and David's lives would be irrevocably altered. The burden of having raised a murderer weighed heavily on them, despite the psychologist's reassurances that Amy's actions were likely influenced by factors beyond their control. They sought comfort in small aspects of life: a new home, new routines, and each other. However, the emptiness left by Amy's crimes, John's death, and the loss of their family's innocence could never be completely filled. "We visit her sometimes," Karen confessed in one of her final interviews, "but it's difficult. She is not the same person, or perhaps she is, and we simply never truly understood her. I am uncertain which is more painful." David, for his part, maintained a stoic demeanor, though his eyes reflected the burden of a man who had endured too much suffering. "You do what you can to move forward," he stated, "but there is no genuine moving on from this." The narrative of Amy Dawson serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the facade of even the most ordinary lives. It is a tale that prompts more questions than it answers: a complex interplay of nature versus nurture, guilt and innocence, love and betrayal. For Karen and David Dawson, as well as the community of Maple Hills, it is a story they will carry with them indefinitely. Ultimately, it transcends the tale of a girl who became a killer. It delves into the fragility of trust, the unpredictability of human nature, and the dire repercussions of turning a blind eye. The Dawsons' lives, once filled with joy and laughter, are now overshadowed by silence and grief, a family irrevocably fractured by the darkness that had been brewing within their own home all along. The residents of Maple Hills will forever bear the wounds inflicted by Amy's actions. They will perpetually question whether there was anything they could have done or any warning signs they might have missed. However, the reality is that certain monsters are beyond prevention. They are inherently malevolent, and their true nature often emerges only after irreversible harm has been inflicted. This concludes another episode of Shadowed Secrets, where we delve into the most sinister aspects of the human psyche and the crimes that astonish the world. We encourage you to subscribe and activate the notification bell to remain informed about our latest episodes. Until we meet again, prioritize your safety and cherish your loved ones.